least, in Devolve. This is an interesting card. I don't think that we're going to see Devolve in any sort of decks on a regular basis, simply because Shaman already has a lot of tools to deal with an individual big minion, like Hex, or a bunch of minions in the opposing side of the board, like Lightning Storm and Maelstrom Portal. If you do want ways to deal with minions that have death rattles or have other abilities to come back, like, say, Murlocs against Anything Can Happen, Devolve could be a powerful tool. If your opponent does play Anything Can Happen and you devolve their board and then clear it with a Maelstrom Portal or a Lightning Storm, that can prevent their Anything From Happen deck to work at all. So I think this can be a powerful card in particular circumstances where you care about those death rattles or death triggers, things like that. But I don't think that it's a card you're going to really see in high-level competitive play outside of those niche scenarios. Alright, next up we have Jinya Water Speaker, which looks like it should be a Murloc, but apparently isn't. I'm kind of bummed because having sort of more stable Murlocs seems pretty appealing to me. But it is a very stable minion. 3/6 for 4. Obviously, the Overload gives it a little bit higher real cost than that. With a Battle Cry Restore 6 health, this is kind of like an anti-heal body that actually has a significant body to fight for the board. So I think that this is a tool that could help enable more controlling styles of Shaman decks. You could even potentially see this in mid-range Shaman. We have seen Healing Wave showing up in some mid-range Shaman decks, sort of as a hedge against Freeze Mage or against, say, Face Hunter, to give them a little bit more tools to preserve their life total, which generally they don't have. But this could really throw a wrench in those aggressive deck or burn-oriented decks' plans, while also just being a totally reasonable minion against other decks. The fact that it can also restore health to your minions, assuming the text actually works that way. You can never really tell in Hearthstone sometimes. But this could be a way to keep your thing from below alive after killing your opponent's Totem Golem or Azure Drake or things like that, that can not only preserve your life, but also preserve your board state. And that's a very, very powerful effect. So this is definitely a very strong card that will see competitive play, just a matter of where it finds a home. Speaking of powerful cards, the Shaman Legendary White Eyes is one that can really just kind of slot into just about any deck. A 5-cost 5/5 taunt is reasonably powerful pretty much no matter what. But with the death rattle of Shuffle the Storm Guardian in your deck, and the Storm Guardian, as you can see here, is a 5-cost 10/10 taunt. And that's obviously, just an incredibly meme-worthy stat line, even if we don't see 4-cost 7/7s really seeing much play these days. But White Eyes is a card that can definitely fit into pretty much any Shaman deck. Could be a sort of curved topper for an aggressive deck that can help protect your other minions. We do tend to see Shaman decks paying 0 for 5/5 taunts these days, so maybe it doesn't necessarily make its way into every deck, but it also definitely has the ability to help give some power to N'Zoth Shaman. We've seen some number of N'Zoth Shaman decks, especially those that are trying to really abuse Ancestral Spirit alongside Cairn, things like that. And those can use a little bit more help in terms of defensive options. We do see, say, Chillmaw in some of those decks, often without even any way to actually enable it. And White Eyes can definitely fill right into that role as a taunt with Death Rattle that is very effective with N'Zoth. So White Eyes, I think, is definitely a card we're going to see in competitive decks that may even help revitalize or even create some new archetypes that haven't really seen a lot of competitive play before. Alright, moving into Rogue, we'll start with the Jade Swarmer, one of the Jade Golem cards for Rogue. This is kind of a weird card to evaluate. It's a 1/1 stealth minion with Death Rattle, summon a Jade Golem. And one thing that's important to keep in mind when you're evaluating any cards in Rogue is the fact that the Rogue Hero Power means you can do a little bit of incremental damage to help something like a Jade Swarmer kill an opposing 3/2 or 2/2 golem. By itself, this is a 1/1 that makes a 1/1. And obviously that's not inherently powerful, but the fact that it can, along with the other Jade Golem cards, get that sort of Jade Golem chain rolling, I think is quite strong. This can enable you to start to generate Jade Golems very quickly, and especially alongside some of the other cards, like Jade Shuriken, which we see here, can definitely get your pace of Jade Golem creation going a lot faster, it seems, than the other Jade Golem classes. You have a couple of cheap options with these two that can both fight for the board and give you the ability to help remove your opponent's minions while generate minions yourselves. And that's one of the most powerful things you can find in Hearthstone, is the ability to have cards that create tempo advantages by being removal plus a threat in themselves. And Jade Swarmer, not great at that, but Jade Shuriken, obviously if you're able to get the combo off and actually create your Jade Golem, can be very strong. And these two obviously work quite well in combination. You can use the Jade Swarmer and the Jade Shuriken together to kill, say, a free health minion or whatever, and that can generate you 2 Jade Golems and sort of really get that ball rolling in terms of making your Jade army. So I do think that these are both really attractive reasons to play Rogue in the Jade Golem category, and we'll have to see if there are any other options the class has to help supplement them, because obviously, as we mentioned time and again, critical mass is just so important with the Jade Golem mechanic. Speaking of critical mass, Gadgetzan Ferryman is a card that has gotten a lot of kind of hate on social media, but I don't think it's really deserved. Obviously, this isn't a card that you're getting a unique effect out of. If you really want to bounce things to your hand, you have options like Youthful Brewmaster already. But the thing is that Youthful Brewmaster has slightly different stats, so obviously it is to be relevant in sort of slightly different metagames or things that you might expect to see from your opponent in the early turns. I think Ferryman is generally going to be more effective. You can stay alive through, say, Pain Blast or Dagger or Backstab or whatever else a little bit more effectively than the Brewmaster can. It also doesn't require you to return a card to your hand. The fact that you can play the Ferryman when you already have a minion in play and you don't have to actually bounce something can, in some situations, be quite powerful or quite relevant because you're not triggering the combo. It can also be a little bit awkward because of the fact that it has combo means it has to be the second thing or later that you play in a turn. So, for instance, you might want to play, say, Jackson. The next turn, you hand it, and then go about your turn however you want. With the Ferryman, you have to play something else first, and then use the Ferryman to return your Reno to your hand. So it could make it a little bit more awkward. That said, it's obviously, considering the exact card we were just talking about, Reno Jackson, the fact that you can have sort of a higher critical mass of cards that do the same sort of thing, you might want to have a deck that has Reno and 2 different types of Panda effects. So you can play the Gadgetzan Ferryman and the Pandaren Brewmaster and include both of them in your deck. You may want a deck that has a bunch of copies of Swashbuckler and this, and you can just keep recycling those and stealing all of your opponent's cards. There is also just a lot of things that have, combo or whatever else in Rogue that can take advantage of bouncing things to your hand. So I think that, the fact that there are comparable things to an existing card certainly doesn't mean that that card doesn't have a home or doesn't have any kind of purpose. I think that there's a lot of criticism in the Hearthstone community about that kind of thing that really goes over the top and is unwarranted. That said, I don't think this is likely to be a super powerful card for Rogue decks. Just want to showcase that the fact that there is a home for something like this in terms of at least making interesting and quirky decks, and I'm sure I will play with the Ferryman in the future. The card that I'm actually kind of the most excited about, not in terms of what's available right now, but in terms of what it means for the design space of Rogue, is Shadow Sensei. It's interesting to see, a card in Rogue that cares about stealth, because it feels like Rogue should care about stealth, and we haven't really seen too much that really bolsters that mechanic in the faction. Right now, there's not that many stealth minions, so I don't think there's really a home for Shadow Sensei in a Rogue deck right now. There's like Jungle Panther that can be really powerful to pump with it, but not really that much else. If there were just a 3/3 stealth Rogue card, it could be an interesting card that Shadow Sensei could pair with, and it could be really powerful. It can pair with, say, Gilded Stalker if you're playing Wild, or whatever else. But if there are more stealth cards in the future, this is a card that could certainly find a home and could be, a cornerstone of a deck if the stealth mechanic gets a lot more support in future mechanic. All right, the final class from the Jade Lotus gang is Druid, and let's talk about another Sensei. We just talked about the Stealth Sensei. Let's talk about the Beast Sensei, Vermin Sensei. This is a card that is kind of weird because it is it's a 5-cost minion that is 4/5 and gives a beast +2/+2. On the surface, is actually potentially pretty strong because giving a beast +2/+2 is a pretty strong effect. 5 cost is maybe a little bit more expensive than I'd want to pay for something like that, but is totally reasonable. One of the big problems is this is a 5-cost card that wants to go in a beast deck that isn't itself a beast, and with Menagerie Warden at the top end for Beast Druid, you really, really want to be playing a beast on 5 like Stranglethorn Tiger to ensure that you have something to duplicate with Menagerie If Vermin Sensei were itself a beast, I think this card would be great, because I think that it would make it much more likely that you actually have a beast for your Warden on 6. You could potentially even copy the thing you buffed with it, or if that thing does die, you'd at least be able to copy the Sensei itself. Unfortunately, it's not a beast. It looks like it's a beast. It's a rabbit. It's like this floating rabbit doing, I don't know, parrot ninja stuff or whatever, but not a beast. So I'm a little bit down on the likelihood of this card really seeing competitive play, simply because the real capper of those decks is definitely going to be Menagerie Warden. It's just so powerful, and I can't imagine this gets the nod over, say, Stranglethorn Tiger. And even, you know, the Azure Drakes that you have in those decks. Azure Drake's a card that is good in those decks because it can give you the ability to catch up when you are behind, and you know, you can play your Azure Drake and your Living Roots and you know, help clear your opponent's board, or Azure Drake Swipe, things like that, that, you know, if your deck isn't really firing in all cylinders, can still be powerful. But this requires that things are going right for you and you have a beast in play that's survived, and that could be more difficult to maximize, so I just don't really see this having a home in the best versions of those beasts. Now we are ready to talk about the Jade Golem cards for Druid. Let's start with the simple one, which is the Jade Blossom. This is basically Wild Growth with a Jade Golem attached to it. First of all, I hate the fact that it is not clear if you get excess mana from this card, if you play it at 10 mana. You know, we've seen cards that do and don't give you excess mana when you play them at 10, that give you mana crystals when you play them at 10. You know, obviously Wild Growth gives you excess mana, Astral Communion gives you excess mana. But if you were to choose Mana Crystal with Mire Keeper, you don't. And part of the reason for that is that the other option for Mire Keeper is something that has an impact when you have 10 mana, so it's okay. But Jade Blossom does something other than give you mana at 10 mana. So it's not clear to me whether this will give you excess mana. And that's pretty annoying, because it feels like this should be something that you can tell from reading the card. All that sort of logistical stuff being said, this is a card that I think if you are playing a Jade Golem Druid deck, you want to play. I don't know if that's going to be a deck that is likely to be powerful. This is not really a card that seems amazing in those. Obviously, yes, if you're playing any Druid deck, in general, you're going to be pretty happy with ramp. This ramps from 3 to 5, which is a lot different than ramping from 2 to 4, but it's a lot more difficult to give up your third turn to ramp, simply because you're more likely to have to react to more things your opponent might already have in play. So you do get a Jade Golem, and generally speaking, this Jade Golem will be a 1/1 Jade Golem, because there's not other, or at least many other cheap options that you can play in Druid to get Jade Golems prior to that. But you will, you know, get your ramp, and that's definitely very valuable. So if you are playing a Jade Golem deck in Druid, this will be in your deck. But it's not really a super exciting card in my mind in order to sort of push you in that direction. One thing that you can ramp to in your Jade Golem deck is Jade Behemoth. This is a 3/6 taunt for 6, which is certainly not exciting. You know, we compare this to like Ben Creepers, which was a 5-cost 3/6 taunt, doesn't see any play. So obviously, the key here is the fact that it summons a Jade Golem with its Battle Cry. And as I've said time and time again, obviously this is something that you care very much about, because the critical mass of Jade Golem effects is really what it takes for these to be powerful. This, I think, is potentially, you know, if you are looking to play make a ton of big Jade Golems, Druid seems to be the class that you're going to go to, and this is a card that can at least give you sort of a speed bump at a meaningful point in the curve, where you can try to defend yourself as you raise your Jade Golem army. So between the ramp of Jade Blossom and the defensive posture of Jade Behemoth, you have at least some tools to help support that basic strategy. So certainly a card that you'll play in the Jade Golem deck, but not one that you're really excited about. The card that most people are excited about for Druid Jade Golem is Jade Idol. Now, this is, in my opinion, the single least understood and most overrated card in all of Mean Streets of Gadgetzan. And what I mean by that is that people have like looked at this and like, oh my god, if a Druid plays this, you can never beat them with a control deck. And first of all, that's outrageous, because the way that control decks work in Hearthstone isn't always just kill all of your things and fatigue you. That is something that happens sometimes, particularly with Control Warrior. You literally remove every threat in their deck, and you totally run out of cards and you lose. And that happens. It certainly does happen. But that's not really the fundamental game plan, and certainly won't be the fundamental game plan of the way these decks are built once Jade Idol exists, if it sees basically any play. Even if it doesn't actually get put into decks, the fact that you can discover it with Raven Idol can very well mean that the just fatigue you completely plan is just off the table against Druids because they can just infinitely shuffle Jade Idols into their deck. But the thing is, that's not the way that so many of those games go, and it's not the way that they go if people build their deck with that in mind. You know, we saw control decks for the longest time, control warrior decks specifically,